Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Leaders in Value Chain podcast.
I am your host, Radu Palamariu, and I am excited to have with us today a great leader for many, many decades in the world of global supply chains. So Cheryl Capps is with us. She has had a tremendous career. She's worked with some amazing companies. She was with GE, then she was with Bristol Myers Squibb, and she recently retired from Corning, where she was Chief Supply Chain Officer. As many of you know, Corning is one of the most innovative companies on the planet, in my opinion, and she's done some amazing things there that she will share some of them with us. Cheryl also has transitioned very successfully and very fast, and she's been on quite a few boards. Actually, she currently sits on the ITGR Holdings Board of Directors, which is a listed medical devices company. She's also on the board and advises companies like World 50, like Elementum, as well as ketteQ, which are software companies, and as well as also in the realm of software 09 Solutions, which is an IBP and planning with a software company. So Cheryl, delighted to have you. Thanks for joining us and taking the time.
Well, thank you, Radu. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm honored to be here and very excited for our conversation.
Super. So maybe let's start, because you're at this phase where you kind of graduated from corporate life, and a lot of people listening, most people listening actually to this, are in the middle of it. I'm curious, when you look back at the many years, 30, 40 years you spent in corporates, what were the moments or the most proud, so to say, moments in your career when you look back? What was those, highlights? Of course, there's many of them, but what's first that comes to mind when you think about that?
That's it's a great question. I think about really the theme of what makes a great moment, and it usually involves taking on just an incredible challenge. Something that either people didn't believe was possible or had just a really critical impact on a customer or a need to happen. And then it involved rallying a team, right? All of your colleagues, maybe your direct reports, senior leadership, and then achieving this just remarkable goal. And I can give you a couple of examples. I remember back in my early days, I graduated from the GE manufacturing program, and I was in a plant startup for aircraft engine controls. And this is back in the day when engine controls used to be hardwired, potted modules. And this concept existed that airplanes could be fly-by-wire. And it was a fiercely debated concept. A lot of people believed if you did that, you'd replace those hydromechanical backups on planes, the planes were going to crash. And so I was in charge of the new product development lab, and I was making the very first digital electronic controls. And the schedules were tough, whether they were military applications, whether they were commercial applications. We made the first controls for Air Force One. They all had flight test schedules that had to be met. And here we were innovating. I was running a union shop, and we had these dates to be met. And each and every time we produced that control, right, from the very first digital control, from the first flight test to the first commercial application, each one of those was just such a great high, because we had done something that had never been done before. As I moved forward with my career, I had another, number of firsts. GE Aerospace, I ran research and development for deep space power. So if you think about how missions are run in the deep space, you can't use your solar arrays, right? Your batteries don't last long enough. So you have to find other ways. And I took over a lab that was in the infancy of developing RTD technology, or technology to basically, you put a lot of layers of metals together. And in deep space, there's variations in temperature. And the variations in temperature, you can capture, you have expansion and contraction, you capture the energy off of that. And so it was in its pioneering, the lab was yielding three energy generating wafers out of every 1,000 that we produced. So the yields are exceedingly low. And we had received the contract for Craft Cassini, which is Comet Rendezvous Asteroid Flyby. The idea is that the Jet Propulsion Labs would use this vehicle to a comet into deep space. Well, as you know, comets don't have schedule. I mean, they have schedules, right? That they aren't going to adapt to your schedule. And so just the rush that we had, when suddenly we were able to go from 3 out of 1,000 to 10 out of 1,000. And then we were getting yields of 50 out of 1,000, to 300 out of 1,000, everything we needed to be able to commercialize. And so once again, you're rallying a big team and you're doing something that's just never been done before. And in fact, a lot of people believe that can't be done. Now, I'll fast forward to the years I was at Bristol Myers Squibb. Once again, the big challenges, when you're with a pharmaceutical company, you're making life-saving medications that need to get to people. And getting new products, life-saving drugs, oncology drugs to patients, as soon as they're approved in their various markets, exceedingly important. And eliminating all of the waste in supply chain, eliminating all of the risk and things that go wrong. Right? Because if a patient goes in for the chemotherapy and the drug's not there, it's a really bad outcome. I remember in particular, there was a case of a small child in the Dominican Republic who was dying. And she was just 3 years old. She had a terrible infection. The only drug that would have saved her was not approved in the Dominican Republic and was not in country. And our government relations had worked tirelessly with the government to secure special approval to get the drug into the country. And at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my team, we were turned on to, we need to get this drug into this country. And we located supply in Panama, and we chartered a plane, and we had trucks standing by and refrigerator units. And we just did everything we could. And we got this drug to the hospital. And of course, that was the first achievement. But then a few days later, when the little girl pulled through, and we got the pictures of her with the balloons in her, I remember the teddy bears in her hospital room and the giant smiles. It was just a point of the career you just never forget. And so this world of supply chain, right, it matters, and innovating matters. And I could give you dozens of examples, but those are the moments I remember the most about my career. As I sit and look back, it wasn't making a quarter, it wasn't making a financial target. I mean, those are all very important. You can't miss those or you don't stay in the job, but those aren't the ones you remember.
That gives the license to operate, but indeed is these moments of contribution, if I can perhaps summarize it as such, and helping people ultimately, right, in bettering their lives or their products, or you were literally a rocket scientist.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
but really, those are the memorable. Those are the memorable, and what you remember the emotion, you remember the people. Of those people that were on those teams, I'm here 30 years later. I'm still linked in with them or on Facebook, or we call, or I see them. You just develop these deep connections because you've lived through something just really special.
Yes. And I also wanted to ask you, how do you see the role of Chief Supply Chain Officer? So it's evolved, it's gotten more and more prominence, more importance. And I guess my hidden, not so hidden question is, do you see more Chief Supply Chain Officers stepping up to be CEOs, to be leaders of companies? Do you see it now after 30 years as being more attractive than it was maybe 10, 20 years ago? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'll start out by saying, when I graduated from university, I graduated from Rice University with a double major in electrical engineering and industrial psychology. There was no such thing as supply chain. The word didn't exist. It hadn't been invented, right? So there certainly wasn't a career path. It didn't mean that the function didn't, the transactional piece of it didn't exist, but it wasn't a recognized function. And so you would argue, if you look at through it that lens, the last 30 or 40 years has made supply chain a thing, right? And then it went through a period of time where it was recognized, universities started having degrees, and it was recognized as a necessary function. I think some of it came with the advent just of ERP systems, right? And for the masses, people could, confuse, the supply chain people are the people that run those ERP systems. I remember the days when businesses would used to do business cases on whether they would do an ERP or not, implementation, because you actually had a choice to run your business, maybe on spreadsheets or on paper or whatever else you used. And so then for a while, it became this SG&A function, right? It's this overhead function that was kind of a necessary evil. It's, and the biggest thing you wanted out of it was for it to be reliable, right? And geez, that would be nice if it didn't cost too much, right? Keep costs down and be reliable,
Yeah.
don't let me, I miss serving a customer or miss, and so it was kind of recognized as, as something that you had to have, almost like I think about like trade compliance, well, you got to have it, right? But certainly not something that was of strategic value to a business. And I always found it amazing. I don't know if you think about it, sourcing in particular, but everybody in the world thinks they can do that job, right? Like, well, I buy stuff, I order from pick whatever, Amazon or, Alibaba, like, I can buy stuff, right?
Yeah. How
Or
difficult is it?
I could schedule a truck, I could schedule a delivery. And therefore they think then they understand your job, right? Because, anybody could do it because I do this in my personal life. It's anybody could do it. It's not like if you were like a nuclear physicist, right? There's no group of people out there who think, geez, I could do nuclear physics and I could do your job, right? But supply chain somehow is this thing that people don't understand. It's immensely complex, yet everybody's pretty sure they could do it. And so I think that there are two things that really changed it. I think it's the advent of digitalization because supply chain really was on the cutting edge for implementation. And what you started to see was, whether it was in strategic sourcing or logistics visibility or automate, advanced planning solutions, you started seeing this certainly impact to the bottom line. And then people were, then getting this idea, well, you could do supply chain tactically and just get stuff done, make sure you, like I said, serve customers, keep your factories running.
Yeah.
Or you could do it in a way where you could be helpful to the bottom line. And digitalization, people started, there are things that you can do in that space. I don't know if it's robotic process automation, it might be, you get, like I said, advanced planning tools. And there was a grudging acceptance that, investing in this space could bring value to business. But it was never equated with the top line, right? And it was never equated to strategic growth or investor value or, any of those words. And then the pandemic happened, right? And a lot of companies learned what happened if they hadn't invested in their supply chain, they hadn't invested in the risk solutions, if they hadn't, and they took it on the chin pretty hard. Not only impacted their bottom line, it impacted their top line. So the first time, right, is when you could equate the top line to supply chain. And that's when companies looked at their boards, right? They looked at their C-suite and they just said, this thing is really impactful in my business and we don't have anybody here who really understands it, right? And people were accepting maybe it's just a little more than me buying from Amazon or Alibaba. It's a little more complicated than that. And I think that did a lot to advance the field. I think that we're at risk of complacency, right? Disruption's here to stay. It's kind of trite. The geopolitics, the global weather events, all of the disruptions, that's not going away. That's the, so you're not going to go back, but people are going to get used to it, right? And so I think if we in supply chain don't take that next step, technology is our friend, right? We have a door open. We've got seats at tables we've never had, right? We're, in front of investors. We're on the boards. Now's the time to really do those innovative solutions that really cement the role of supply chain on something that grows, enhances company value and top line as well as bottom line. I think it's just really important.
Love it. And I mean, as you know, we put together a book full of examples of different chief supply chain officers that made it to CEOs and how that is possible. And also that this element of thinking strategically, partnering the business and getting innovation was such a theme, exactly like you said. I guess the still the reality, and maybe I'll flip it also a little bit on the negative, but to keep it pragmatic, is that sometimes people get in supply chain, they get very tactical. They love their spreadsheets, they love their data, they love their analytics, they
Hmm.
love their jargon, and then they bore the C level, they bore the board to death, and it's like, okay, look, this is not adding business value. Any words of advice or suggestions or what not to do that this prompts you?
I do. I'm actually pretty passionate about this topic. As I mentioned, I came out of university when supply chain wasn't a thing. And then if I think about my career and what I did, okay, if I had planned to be a chief supply chain officer, I would have done it the way my career panned out
Mm,
because it made me the perfect person for it. And let me explain. The first part of my career, a third of it was with GE. And this is like my formative experiential. I got experience across different businesses,
mm,
aircraft engine, medical systems, aerospace, motors, industrial systems, right? So I got very, very, very broad on the business experience. But then functionally, I had roles in manufacturing management, finance, quality, Six Sigma, right? In manufacturing, as a plant manager, in contracting, R&D, talked about, in space science, research, development, strategy, overall business strategy, government relations, business leadership. I had marketing, sales on a private label product line in industrial motors. And obviously some of the core, supply chain sourcing and planning. But that gave me what that did was it helped me speak the language of all of those functions. Because I was R&D, when I was in my R&D role in the satellite business, gosh, I was 29 years old, I had 300 PhDs that worked in my organization. And as you said, this was space science, right? It was rocket science.
yeah.
And I had to rally the troops around their language. They weren't going to take my language. It had to be their language. When I was in marketing sales, I had to speak that language. And so I developed the skill set of speaking in all of these different languages. Then I go to like the second part of my career. So when I was at Bristol Myers Squibb, that's when I would look at it like kind of a funnel that I started really honing my skill in supply chain. So I was now at, I would say, first level executive through senior executive levels when I was in that place. And that's where, I headed up manufacturing and supply chain for a med device company. And it had the engineering, customer service functions, but I had, end to end supply chain. I had roles in the pharmaceutical business and global sourcing and global planning. I was in the orthopedic implant business, packaging and procurement and transportation. And that's when, but doing those roles, I spoke the language from
Mm,
before. I just became end-to-end expert in supply chain. And then that last piece of my business, of my career, was with Corning. That's when I could focus on being the best and
yeah.
transforming, creating a supply chain organization, transforming it. That's when I moved up into, from senior VP into the C-suite, being on the CEO's staff, right? Again, relying that skill set of being able to talk in
Mm,
everybody else's language. Supply chain, you have to worry about, you don't want to describe it, you want to make it simple enough for people to understand, but not
yes.
so simple that they think they can do it, right? So then it's like a catch 22 when
Yeah.
they think it's so easy, right? But that's where you bring it all together. It's about leading a group. I was in that role for 12 years, people, process, technology. You could focus on innovation. Now, taking a company to be best in class, you could focus on doing things, advancing the field of supply chain, innovating. And that's when it all comes together.
Mm, mm. Love it. Love it. Some amazing examples. And I want to double click on one particular one because it is so relevant for the days that we live in. Geopolitics, you mentioned weather situations. I mean, we have a ongoing crisis in the Red Sea, which seems to be,
Oh
if anything,
gosh.
it doesn't seem to be getting any better. And if we're gonna get all of the sudden ideas in other parts of the world that, hey, let's attack commercial ships is probably not a good not a good path for anybody in global
Mhm.
trade. So with that prequel, I know that at Corning, you were extremely successful in developing a digitalized global risk detection and mitigation system. I mean, you were sharing with me that this was recognized by the National Association of Manufacturers as best of the best. And I wanted to go a little bit in that because it's something that would be beneficial for a lot of the listeners. So first, maybe what was the situation before you developed this and that urged you? I mean, it's obvious challenges that maybe, but just to say the point A where you started at Corning and point B where you ended once you had this in place, and then I'll ask some more lessons learned in the process.
Yeah. So yes, it is one of the things that we were most proud of. It was the innovation that kept our factories running and our customers served throughout the pandemic. Which, if you understand, we were building a plant in Wuhan, China,
Yeah.
and we had been, as I said, working on innovation, and had been working with a number of companies on innovating with tool sets. And if you think about risk, the first thing you want to know is you want to be able to detect a risk when it's emerging. That's really important. So you think about AI, machine learning, right? Being able to have that front end visibility of the marketplace. An explosion happens on a factory a Saturday night. By Sunday morning, wouldn't it be nice if I knew that explosion happened? I could project, first of all, did I have anything in that factory? But I could project the impact on the world supply of that particular material. I could project whether the world or my geography would be going into an allocation. I could determine and project what was going to happen on the spot market. And then I could put a workflow in place so that everybody who needed to work on that problem was working on that problem. And this isn't a theoretical. This is an example that happened in the helium market. So those of you know, worldwide helium supply is highly constrained. Explosion happened at a factory on a Saturday night. By a Sunday morning, the entire team globally was on hand. We knew where existing spot supply existed, where the spot markets were. We could project what the allocation plan would be. And when the markets were opening in Europe on the middle of the night, Sunday night going into Monday, we were placing our spot orders. The rest of the world didn't know about that factory explosion. In fact, they didn't learn about it till Tuesday or Wednesday when that company started notifying customers. And when they notified the customers, they were not able to articulate what the projected impact would be. They were only able to say, we had an impact, we're going to be down for a while. We don't know the status of your orders. We don't know, what the future holds. It'll be a week or two before we can determine what an allocation plan was. The price of helium went through the roof. We had locked in at the pre-event pricing by that early detection. And so if you think about supply chain, we always think about it in terms of, okay, did risk events like before the pandemic and after, right? Because the pandemic was just so big. But the reality is if you were actually tracking events, and we had software that was doing it, events that were impacting our supply chain, it was growing at a pretty good pace the 4 or 5 years before the pandemic. So if you look at all of the events that happen in the world and the ones that impact your supply chain, you were to graphic those, you would see that curve was actually projected to go up at a pretty healthy pace. And there was a big spike with the pandemic, of course, but then it kind of came back down, and it's on that same trajectory it was on almost almost a decade ago. So the data was there for you to see this was going to happen. And that's why I say it's not going away. So I'll talk about the pandemic. In December, you remember the world shutting down in March. Our system was chirping. Our system was telling us there were disruptive events going on in China. It was actually picking things up late November into early December. It was taking longer for trucks to get from point A to point B. There was absenteeism. We were seeing impacts on sites in China. And so we were actually in a position to call the pandemic by the end of the year. And once we decided it was a pandemic, we could implement a pandemic protocol. And so the first weeks in January, we had PPE on order, not just for all our factories in the world, but for all of our communities where we had plants. we had pulled forward deliveries. We started, as states were shutting down, we were learning about it live, reaching out to suppliers and helping them make their filings to be deemed as essential businesses. Before they even knew they were shut down, we were calling companies and saying, you're shut down, you're going to be shut down. Let us help you keep operating. Because of course, we had, as Corning, a lot of essential products in the medical business. We relied on, so once we detected it, I mentioned the importance of workflow.
Yes.
Those of you, you grew up in an ERP world, whether it was, SAP or PeopleSoft or whatever you grew up on, workflow is kind of clunky. That's not what it's all about. But I worked with a company to innovate, have been for the last 2 years, Elementum, which uses AI-driven workflows to automate and optimize business processes to deliver that immediate impact. And if you're not working with a company like that and you're not working with the tools, you're really missing that next generation. But
Yes.
it connects natively to any data cloud and allows you to use, AI, machine learning, large language model cases, and implement in not projects that you implement in weeks or months or years, heaven forbid. This is like minutes. So you can develop these applications. So you just imagine the state we're in. We've learned something new. We've got to put a protocol in place and execute in, and we would be able to develop these apps. We'd be able to launch. We'd be able to, to move live. And so that combination with, working on the front end with risk methods, working with an integration house, private integration house that was doing backroom integration for us, being able to work with an Elementum. We had a program that we had been working on. Actually, we were using it for several months before the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, we pulled the plug and went live. Every geography, every business, every function simultaneously. And we were so glad we innovated. Like I said, we had no P&L, no impact from P&L due to supply chain disruption. We didn't shut down a plant, not a single plant. We did not shut down a customer through the whole pandemic.
I mean, which is unreal. And of course, when you look at the bottom line and the savings, and I mean, this is just specifically for the example with the price of commodities, right? If you know that there's a blow up in a factory and that the price will go up, but you buy it at the right time, the savings are, I mean, easily to be quantified for the business. Now, I'll give you some. I already I can hear people listening to this and say, yeah, but I work for a small and medium-sized company, or this probably cost a bomb, and because Corning is such a big big company, I don't have the budgets to do it. So I'm just throwing some curveballs because
You know what? That's
what would you say to
because
that?
I will tell you, it's because we grew up in this ERP generation.
Yeah.
You do an SAP implementation. It is very risky, right? You all hear the nightmare stories of its product opportunities. It is, cleansing your data. It is expensive, not the software, the service, but aligning and going live. And that can take a massive team, and it can take months, even years, and converting a whole company is massive. The new technologies aren't like that. When I tell you, when I gave you the example with Elementum, I can create an app in minutes. I can create the app for less money than it takes me to write a business case, right? The payback period. I will tell you, the payback period on some of these new tools are weeks to a couple months. I got to the point where the CFO was coming to me saying, "Hey, do you have any more of these things up your sleeve?" Right? Because if your ROI is 2 months, right? You're in a calendar year. You're never having to fight for investment dollars. They pay for themselves. I'm telling you, it's a different world. This idea that, think about just about data. So back in the day, data was something people did on spreadsheets and put in files. And then it moved to this idea of, R3 databases, right? And you were a slave to the data. You had an army of people that were cleansing data, and you're putting it in and out of your ERP, incredibly massive. And then the cloud, right? All of a sudden, oh, data lakes. We can do data lakes, and then you can, do different manipulations of the data. But now your data is in the cloud. But the issue is supply chain is real time, right? And so you put that data in the cloud, and then you extract it from the cloud, and then you do your function, and then you put it back into the cloud, and you compare the two, and the data doesn't match anymore, right? Because time has elapsed. Think about this world where you do your operations in the cloud, right? Like
Yes.
when it's that real time, right? You've eliminated that whole element of error and all of that cleansing and all of the iterative motion that you do. And that's why I say, when you say you can implement an app in minutes, you can automate business process, right, in days. It's a different way. And when you can do things in minutes and days, they're not very expensive.
Mm.
So I never, and yes, Corning was a big company, but it was a company where we put a lot of investment into product and process. It wasn't in your functions, right? So the investments, comparatively, were not huge.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and if you show the results within 2 months, and I mean, and have the CFO coming to you for more tips, you know for sure that you're doing something.
That's right.
Because
I've advised people
yeah,
who are, you say you don't understand at my company, I don't have that great relationship with finance. I have to fight for every penny. I can't get it. And it's like, start out, generate some savings, use it as seed money, right? Think about it
yes,
as like a quick starter business. Use your seed money. As I will guarantee you, within a year, your finance group is going to come to you. If you have 2 months return on investment, they're going to be looking for you. You don't have to be selling to them.
yeah. You're the star of the you're the best advocate of the
Absolutely.
CFO, which is yeah. Final question, Cheryl, because I think this again, you're a treasure cove, yeah, of gems of advice and information, and specifically, I think there's a lot to gain of what you did incredibly successfully to be on so many boards, right? So you barely retired from Corning a few months ago. I mean, you were already on the board of the public company ITGR, but in a few months you were already super busy with doing different advisory and board level positions. Now, we discussed a little bit offline how the 3 stages of the career, and I really liked how you shared that you have stage number 1, where you are building your career and hopefully to make it to the C-suite. Then stage number 2, you make it to the executive and the C-suite, and then you're extremely busy because obviously that takes a lot of time. And stage number 3 is what happens after you graduate from the career. And a lot of executives like yourself want to be on boards or want to keep themselves active. Most, actually, I would dare say. However, there's a preparation in that stage 2 for stage 3 that not a lot of people do. And you did it well, right? So maybe sharing some words of advice of how to do that transition successfully like you did.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to, that model, give credit to a good friend and mentor of mine. And I was really blessed that 4 or 5 years ago, someone pulled me aside and just said, pointed this out, which is that, at stage 1, you're spending all this time, right, as you're growing your career, focusing on stage 2, what you're going to, like how are you going to be ready when you get that C-suite job or when you get the senior VP job, how you're going to have the skills and everything. And then why in stage 2 are you not thinking about how you're going to be ready for stage 3? You just somehow retire one day and go, I'd love to be on a Fortune 500 board, right? And you haven't prepared, right? And so they gave me this advice, which is brilliant advice, about 4 years ago, and which gave me time to get ready. So first of all, the old adage, you have to be on a board to be able to get on a board, right? They want board
Yes.
experience, right? And so, forgive the sports analogy. This is not about I'm going to use baseball, your batting average. It doesn't matter that, I tried out for 3 boards and I got on all 3, right? Or I only got on 1, and my average was, 33%. This is about shots on goal, right? Because these seats come up and it's who and who can endorse you, who thinks about you, if you have that skill set that they're looking for, right? These are all things that you can put on paper, kind of known commodities. So increase your odds, right? So if you think back coming into the pandemic, boards were suddenly looking for people with they were realizing they didn't have supply chain experience. So
Yep.
strike while the iron's hot. get out there and let people know. And so at that point in time, I was out there saying, hey, I have experience when I was with my med device company. I transitioned from public to private equity. I was a limited partner. I attended board meetings. I attend Corning board meetings. I attend committee meetings. I have this experience from being on the management side. I'm in supply chain. I'm an innovator. I'm leading edge. I can help companies, diagnose and just fix their businesses. That was really resonating, and recruiters were looking for that. And I got to all of the recruiters, and sure enough, recruiter produced that opportunity. I had worked with my company. I was really blessed that our CEO supported me because we had a policy in place that senior executives couldn't be on outside boards. So we had to change that policy, but he supported me in that because the reality is that that's when they were looking for supply chain talent. And for all of you who are listening, that time is still now, but don't waste that time, right? You don't want to go back to mediocrity and people forget how painful it was. Now's the time to look. The other thing that I did is that I started really heavily networking outside the company in the last few years. I was always an innovator my entire life. I was known internally to my companies as the person you put in the job who's going to fix something or transform something or innovate something. That was me. But I didn't have a brand. I didn't have a outside of the company. And so, I joined World 50. I got to work with other great global supply chain leaders. When I innovated with companies, I got to know the CEOs. I helped them meet with their other customers. I took those calls. When publications, podcasts, or calls came in, I took them, right? I used it for an opportunity to highlight my company and show the great work we were doing and explain to people why we were the company you wanted to have as a business partner. And so I very, very actively worked on, building up that network. And so when I announced my retirement, before I even got to the retirement date, I had already two offers. And then, shortly thereafter, right, as well as the public board that I was on. And then, another offer came in October, another in December, and closing on another agreement now. And I told people when I retired, I was about 90% excited and 10% terrified because I thought, in the back of your mind, like, what if I can't do this again? What if that was it? What if that was the one, right? And it's not. I'm here to tell you, 4 months, I'm in my 5th month, and it was well worth the investment. So invest in that last stage of your career before you get there. That's my advice.
Yes, no, all of it. And what a conversation. So Cheryl, blessed. You shared so many different practical tips on this conversation. So very thankful. I'm sure that the audience will take a lot of nuggets, and I urge I urge them to implement and action it. It's been a delight having you, and thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you. As I said, always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also, subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.